Welcome back. Today we will be talking about Alex Karp's recent comments on Palantir. First, we can note that Palantir, the stock, along with the rest of the market, has been absolutely flushed. We saw Palantir PLTR drop below $14 for the first time since 2020. The stock around 14 as I record this. In this video, I really want to talk about the key themes that Karp outlines and sort of the long-term vision. We haven't really heard much from him on what Palantir is doing and why, especially on the longer-term vision and what its product future is, and more so the holistic nature of the business. But I'm going to get into all of that, and we're going to talk about more basically on Palantir and how they're positioning themselves for a future that they think is coming. And it really seems like Palantir is preparing for a future, is designed around a future in which there is so much complexity and chaos that institutions start failing or start performing way worse than they would otherwise. What they've talked about for so long is being able to deal with uncertainty, and that's what their products are built around. But it really becomes clear in this interview what that actually means. And what that actually means is Palantir has been building these products for those reasons. And when you have these full stack, full solution products for dealing with complexity, certain institutions or companies don't even realize that they need it because they don't in this current moment. What they want is a thin product, as Karp refers to, a thin solution that they can just plug right in and just keep going. And that is where Palantir's competition exists in this sort of thin marketplace. But Palantir really doesn't have any competition in the thick marketplace because there's no one building the solutions like them on a thick scale. But I'm getting way off my notes here. That's basically an overview of what we're going to dive into right now. So he talks about building the future of tomorrow. And tomorrow, he says, in quotes, tomorrow will be about dealing with a step function in terms of complexity for many reasons. So if you operate under the assumption that is correct, and we've really seen this over the last few years, how things have gotten more and more complex, more and more difficult to deal with all of this uncertainty. We've seen it with the pandemic, so many other reasons, but basically you have other software, Palantir's competitors, if you will, Palantir's competitors being an organization choosing to build their own software or choosing to integrate a different solution not named Palantir, is really built to deal with simplicity. And that simplicity is fine. It works in a place like today where there is not as much complexity as Palantir is forecasting there to be. Palantir expects so much more uncertainty in the future where the existing solutions today will simply break and not be able to handle it. This is where we get into the topic on sales, because Alex Karp says Palantir obviously has to convince people that they need something that they will need tomorrow in the future. They've built this product, they're continuing to develop it, they're working on the pace of innovation and constantly developing what he calls 400 applications within Foundry, 400 plus, because it is a full stack they've been developing. There's so many components that go into this software that really combine to make the whole solution. But basically, the problem Palantir has is no one agrees that they would need this whole Foundry product. So they say, hey, we would actually just like part of that. For instance, it could be the quality archetype. They just want the quality archetype for the supply chain. So they could say, hey, we just want to deal with our supply chain. That is all we need. So what Palantir really needs to work on, and what Karp is saying, is their whole sales pitch is we're delivering the things that you will need tomorrow, but today in this current environment. So it might not appear that you need them, but this is what we are working on, and this is what we are delivering today. And that's really why the sales pitch is so hard, because it really is the ultimate sales pitch, and really with ultimate difficulty, because how do you pitch someone on something they don't know why they would need it, right? But that is exactly what great companies do. That's what Steve Jobs used to do. You could say that's what Elon's doing today. Many other great companies and great examples of that. So Palantir is really in this phase of how do we figure out the sales problem, where we believe very firmly that our product is what it is for the reason that the future is what it's going to be. So how do we prove that? Well, they can prove it with track record. They've done incredible things, as we will get to in a moment, with the pandemic and sort of vaccine distribution, supply chain stuff, all of that. But that really is the question, and that is something that Palantir's going to need to work on. What does that really come back to? Well, I'd say it really comes back to, we've seen this play out in real time with Palantir's demo day. So you'll recall Palantir went public in September of 2020. And we saw the demo day, the first demo day with all three of their products sort of overviewed. I know people hate when I say sort of, but it's a bit of a filler phrase for me, unfortunately. So I will leave that in there just to explain that. I'm going to try and get away from that. Anyway, demo day was about the three products. But then they realized, after that went out and they showed it off to the world, they realized that there is so much in Foundry, and we didn't even really prove what a specific business would use this for. So what they did was they started doing this double-click series, which we've only gotten one segment of, but I've been told more are coming. I'm sure that's gotten put off to the side. But anyway, we got the first double-click, which said, again, for example, here is this quality archetype for supply chains that we can use for this specific instance. So that's what Karp would call a thin product, in my opinion. So it's a very slight piece of a module of a much greater whole that Palantir can more easily say, hey, this is what we are doing. This is what would directly benefit you. So we saw the move from the demo day to the double click, and that really showed in real time the change of Palantir realizing we won't be able to sell you on this much larger product, and only some people are able to see the future as we see it. Now, of course, nothing is guaranteed, but the future as Palantir sees it does not really jive very well with companies that are looking just for thin products. So double click, or demo day as I would call it, is much more of a thick presentation, while double click's much more of a thin presentation. So let me know if you disagree with that, but let's keep looking forward. So what Palantir says is they're not backwards looking. A lot of the software that's developed today is backwards looking. This is what Karp is saying, but their software, they believe, is very forward looking. So what does he mean by that? Well, he means that it's really this whole talk about uncertainty, about dealing with what you don't know is going to happen and building for that. So this is the real point about Palantir, is they're building this, they're not actually getting any benefit. So I just wanted to go on this slight tangent, and it's Karp saying that they do sales when they could actually maintain talent. So Karp, of course, had the famous sort of saying that they would never do sales, he would be the only salesperson, but now they've switched to a sales. But he said he wanted to be able to maintain not talent, but culture. Maintain the culture, maintain who the business really is, and keep Palantir what it's about, and not corrupt the culture, turning it into something that it is not. Because remember, this is an engineering culture. This is about being entrepreneurial and driving for what? For building products of the future. Karp didn't want to shift the entire business into a sales business, because that's really not what Palantir is all about. All right, so now let's get a little deeper on Palantir and its products. So here's Karp. He basically says, if I just summarize this correctly, he is operating under the assumption that Palantir's products existing today are underappreciated because the macro environment for which they were designed for which they were built for, the reason that they were made, has not yet arrived. And we talked about the uncertainty, the complexity, the chaos has not yet arrived in the way that Palantir expects it to be, in which Palantir's products will become essential in an environment like that, and that has not yet arrived. So you could say, hey, well, what if this never happens? It might never happen. Palantir could just be delusional. That's not actually the case, because we've seen products for the future where Palantir has actually delivered significant value, such as vaccine distribution, such as manufacturing. As Karp says, manufacturing is one of those examples. Palantir has done great work. It's not a bet the company moment or bet the company vision, but bringing to light what Karp expects from the company and from the future is basically saying our products are undervalued today, and not because they should be valued more, but because I believe the future will be different, such that our products will be valued more. He goes into this discussion on the startups, and this catches me a little off guard. So we have this talk about the startups, and he says, so since we're not able to prove some of this to institutions today, to organizations today, we're going to actually work with some startups because there's a lot of dislocation going on that with the startups. So this is where I kind of sort of start to lose the train of thought, or not just the train of thought, but the business is, what are we going to do if you can't actually prove that your software is important enough, if things are going great and you as a business don't need to deal with uncertainty, if there is none? Now, maybe that will never happen, but that is sort of a risk to Palantir's business. Is what they're developing not important enough? Of course, I don't necessarily believe that, and I don't think that is true either, or will be proven true, but that is a risk to the business if Palantir is building out, as they so often say, 5 years into the future. Now, first of all, how could they even know what 5 years into the future looks like? But also, what if they're wrong about that? What happens? So one last mention on the sales part of things is Karp talks about Palantir's product requiring an understanding of the product before you can actually use it. So this is certainly a knock against Palantir and its growth. So how do you grow? How do you actually obtain the growth when you are limited by the forward deployed engineer, when you need someone understanding of the product before you can actually scale it up? Now, that hasn't been a risk in my opinion, and I don't see it being a risk. The more they're able to develop their products as self-service platforms and very thin modules of those and get those out, we'll talk about that in a moment. But I don't see this as a risk, but Karp notes it as a risk, how their products actually require an understanding before they can be used, at least some of it. And he also talks about, again on the sales, I know I've been bouncing around here, but he talks about if a product doesn't map to a specific solution, is it valuable enough? So what about the value of Palantir in an organization that doesn't believe they need to deal with uncertainty or doesn't see the future like Palantir sees it? And subjective thinking, but here's the part that I really want to talk about, which is this three-pronged analysis of the future of Palantir's business. So we have what Karp says is Palantir today, and maybe I got some of this wrong. I don't think so. I think I am pretty, and I'm going to be drawing this out, but hopefully everything comes out just right. Here we have Palantir today. Here we have Palantir in some years, and then we have Palantir in some, I guess we could say, decades. Now, probably this is a little shorter of a time frame than that, but where is Palantir today in Alex Karp's point of view? So what I think he said is, the question is Palantir able to supply thin products in the current environment? So thin. So right now Palantir's focused on their thin products. They've all of this software for enterprise, and how can they best deliver what is required of them as a software platform for the current environment? So that does not cater to Palantir's whole business or their entire code base or everything that they have today. It's only parts of it. It's only parts that are needed in today's environment. So that's really where they are today. A very limited, I guess you could say, point of view or where Palantir exists in this current environment. But where he sees Palantir going, and I guess you could call this a master plan. I don't know what you want to call it. It could just be a worldview or a company-wide view. It's really hard to say a master plan for Palantir, but I've tried to say that in the past. Anyway, he talks about this thick, future-oriented products. So I'll write down here. So we're going into the thick, future-oriented products. So the future-oriented products. What does that mean? Some of them we don't know of at this point. I'm sure they're still working on products. He mentioned, of course, they're always working on products, and some of those are in development. Some of those are naturally Foundry for builders, many of their other subdivisions of those, and what they can do to make those thick future products, where if there's so much uncertainty, you need a thick product to deal with it. A thin little solution to one part of your business is not going to solve anything. So he talked about that as the second step. If we call this the first, the second, and the third, actually let me move it so it's a little more clean. 1, 2, 3. That isn't any more clean, but we'll just go with that. The third step to the plan here is less differentiated products. Less differentiated. So what happens from here to here? Well, what happens is Palantir is currently building today for these thick future products. But what's going to happen eventually is other competitors are going to develop, oops, don't want to delete that, are going to develop these thick future products. So what's going to keep Palantir ahead? What's going to keep them ahead of the competition once, let's say, Microsoft, let's say anyone potentially could get really interested and invested in thick future products such as Palantir. So what's going to keep them ahead? What's the next point of view? Well, Karp talks about this. It's getting less differentiated and decoupling the product and selling modularly. So essentially, we're going from thin to thick to thin again, more thin than it was. Now, I don't entirely understand what Karp means by less differentiated products, but I do believe it is going more of the modular route, taking some of these thicker components and breaking them down. So ultimately, Karp believes Palantir's product complexity is not valued right now because they're building for this with the ultimate future in mind. Even this is a big deal. Even this, years out, 5 years as he calls it, or maybe sooner, these thicker future products, that is what they're aiming for currently. And then there's this idea of decoupling. Again, need to figure out what that really means in a tangible context. But Palantir's product complexity isn't valued as it should be right now. Because I guess you could say the market views Palantir as the distributor of these thin products when they are working and they're building for these thicker products. So there's more value than it necessarily appears. And then just one last note on attracting world-class engineers. So Karp mentions attract, retain, and enable. He wants to not only attract the best, retain the best, but enable them to also build the future. Build what we're talking about right here, which Palantir is sort of disguised as a company that delivers thin products, but is actually working on developing and producing and distributing, I should say, thick products. A lot went on there, but I wanted to give my thoughts, and it really seems that Palantir has this grander vision. Karp has made that clear. Grander vision for the future. Now I'll just give my last final thoughts. Do I think Palantir should be given credit for a future in which it develops and deploys thick products? I don't think so necessarily. I know Palantir has the building blocks for its products to be like that, but I don't necessarily think it should be given full credit for that future because a lot of that needs to be proven. So once again, I think this talk was certainly eye-opening into the future, into how Alex Karp is thinking about and guiding the business towards that future with talent in mind and a worldview about complexity and how institutions and organizations can fail in the midst of complexity and how best to actually enable these organizations and allow them to deal with the uncertainty and thrive in it by using Palantir software. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.